The International NBA Draft Combine is underway. Who are some names that we should be monitoring? And what are some big news from the Combine? Coming up on Locked On NBA Big Board. What's up? My name is Richard Stayman. You might know me better as @MavsDraft on Twitter, NBA Draft Film on Instagram. I do some high-quality NBA draft scouting reports as well as mock drafts. Really appreciate everybody who continues to make Locked On NBA Big Board the first listen of your Wednesday and every day. On this episode, we're going to talk about the International Draft Combine. Some news dropped right before recording this about Nikola Topic. So we'll go over that, as well as some just international almost scouting reports of some of the other fringe first-round players such as Pacome Dadiet, Zachary Risache, Ariel Hukporti, he's probably a second-round prospect, and then A.J. Johnson, who's unknown stock. So let's dive right into it with Nikola Topic. He has battled injury all year, hasn't really been able to stay super healthy. It's kind of been the knock on him. He played a lot through November, December, got hurt around the turn of the calendar in January, came back in April, got hurt at the NBA Draft Combine, the one that was held in Chicago. And now today, just about an hour ago, it's revealed that he partially tore his ACL. So what does that mean for his stock, and who is Nikola Topic? You probably if you've listened to the show, you probably have heard us talking about him plenty, but let me give the rundown on who Nikola Topic is. He's a big guard, listed, let's look, he's listed as about 6'6", 6'5", depending on where you look. I don't think he's measuring at the International Combine. He's comfortable driving with both hands. He's not overly athletic, like he doesn't finish above the rim and doesn't explode, but he has really good touch. So you look at the finishing ability, it seems like it can translate with better space where he can operate and use that touch in a more controlled way when it's one-on-one or not necessarily three guys in the paint, right? He's also a really good playmaker, has some of those point forward skills, but he's probably more of a true point guard. Closer to that, a big guard rather than a point forward. I've seen both labels on him. I would probably go with point guard. He has really good shooting touch. The numbers are pretty strong with that. Let's pull it up and see what he's at from three. For the year, he is at 30% from three and then 88% from the line on about the same volume of threes and free throws. So generally, I preached this before and I'll preach it again. If you shoot high volume, high free throw percentage, and this isn't necessarily high volume, it's respectable volume, I would say, which passes the test for me. But you have low shooting numbers on decent volume from three, I probably trust the free throw percentage more. So I think that'll eventually get there. He does need to iron out some of those mechanics, such as the release point is really bad. The mechanics in general, the ball comes out with the line drive. A lot of times it comes out flat. It's not always repeatable. Really, those are the big issues. It's just finishing above the rim and repeatability as a jump shooter, should he ever put that together. That's going to be the big thing for him, is if he comes a shooter, it's not really a worry. So I don't think that's something, to me, I would bet on him getting there. Now, how this affects his stock. It really hurts him on draft night. I don't think this is a long-term injury. I'm not a doctor by any means. In fact, I got C in biology in high school, so take this with a grain of salt. But I do think, just knowing what we've seen from watching NBA players in the past with ACL injuries, it's just not what it was even 10 years ago, but especially like 20 years ago. Guys come back from that, especially partially torn. That's a promising variation of it, I guess, where it's like he didn't get a full tear, which is good. Still not ideal because he's going to miss a good amount, I would guess, of his rookie year. Currently, the consensus mock has him around 5, give or take a spot. I think this pushes him down a little bit. So what this does for Topic's stock, for him, I think this really pushes him down on draft night. And it says, okay, if we're the Wizards, right, let's just use them as an example. They're a little bit extreme, but they're at a blank slate. They have the number 2 pick. They're not taking him because I don't think so. Unless they're just that sold on their upside. Like, you have to have him number 1 on your board to take him top 5 at this point, because you have to accept that he's going to sit out and be behind for most of his rookie year. In fact, I would probably, I don't know how severe it is, but I would be perfectly okay with not even playing him until the next calendar year and just letting him get fully healthy, because there's really no reason to rush him. Let him develop behind the scenes. I think that's something that's lost too in a lot of NBA conversations, is development isn't just done in NBA games, like in game time themselves. It's done in practices. It's done in those player development times. That's where a lot of development happens. It's not just the on-court reps. The on-court reps is what gets them those really, again, the reps, just to see, has this made progress? Can it be applicable? Is it just theoretical and something they use in practice, or is it something that can really be used to help the team? So with Topic, I don't think a team needs to draft him to have him right away. And whatever team that is needs to be comfortable. So that eliminates teams like Detroit, Houston, should be looking to get somebody more value. Washington, look, if they have a number one, I'm not against it. I think it's still a little bit of a reach given that you won't have him for most of his rookie year, or at least half. I would say if I were them, look, the argument for the Wizards taking him would be, well, they're going to tank again next year with or without Topic. Doesn't necessarily hurt. You could push that race for Ace Bailey, Cooper Flagg, whoever else you want to throw in that mix. It's a really strong draft. Or the opposite end is, well, maybe we should try and get some more guys to develop in the meantime and have another guard, because Tyus Jones may not be back. We don't know what's going to happen with that. It's better off to have some insurance and say we need more guards and have someone to be developing while you're being bad. So I would err on that side of it more than it's fine, next year is better. Now, looking at some other teams, again, Houston doesn't need him. San Antonio, maybe. But I think if they think he's there at 8 rather than 4, why take him at 4? Because Detroit's not going to take him. They need somebody who can help them get better now. That team's been rebuilding for too long for having a number 1 pick that is good. Charlotte's probably not going to take him because kind of the same thing. They have win now pieces in Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball that are cornerstones. And then Portland doesn't need a guard. So I think that puts him right at that 8th pick with San Antonio. That's where I would mock him. I don't think Memphis takes him at 9. I don't think anybody's really jumping to get him. Chicago wouldn't. Utah wouldn't. Oklahoma City, probably not. That'd be a weird way to use some of their assets to trade up. So I think I'd almost lock him in at 8 personally. So it's not really a loss because he was already being mocked around 4. Now, how that does change things, if they're really the only team in the top 10 that could be big time in on him, they're probably not taking Dillingham. That's another guy, like it was him or Topic. I think that could really impact how they draft elsewhere, where they're probably not going to look at another guard at 4. Maybe they try and take 2 for more depth. I just don't think that would be a good idea personally. Just team building, I'm against that with taking multiple guys in the same year. Like, also not the same thing, but just the way the Sixers took Noel, Embiid, and Okafor in consecutive years. Like, we got to learn from the mistakes. Taking overlapping positions where guys can't develop together, that's not it. So I think that locks him in personally at that number 7 spot. If I were, I don't know. I don't think it really changes that much. He was number 8, not number 7. I think this doesn't change Topic's stock that much. I think ultimately he was going to be a Spur. It was 4 or 8. Look, he lost a few $1 million, or not even a few million, but like down the road, you lost a little bit of money going from 4 to 8. But he's probably at this point as safe of a lock to go number 8 as there is. I just don't see another outcome. The Spurs can live with number 8, especially having another lottery pick, because the whole rule set I would put on it is, do you have another lottery pick? Yes, they check that box. Can you afford to have somebody sit for a year because you already have that cornerstone that's playing? Yes. And it's with that special exception, I think the Spurs are the right team for him. So let's talk about some of these other guys like Zachary Reese-Shea, Pacome Dadiet, Ariel Hukporti, and AJ Johnson. But first, let me tell you about BetterHelp. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to somebody who's unbiased on your life. For example, I could tell you about how stressed I am about the finals starting tomorrow with the Mavs and Celtics. But sometimes that's not all that's on someone's mind, and you need an unbiased audience at the same time. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming and the drama. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the Amazon Fire TV channel app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So back here again, my name is Richard Stayman. You know me probably better as at Mavs Draft than my actual name. But let's talk about some of these international guys. I think let's go with the most polarizing one. I was going to start with Dadiet, had him on the order that way, but let's do Dadiet. So excuse me, I about that completely wrong. Let's do Ricochet because he is the more polarizing player. Let's get him out of the way. He just turned 19. He's playing on a competitive team in France. Now, he's also 6'9", 6'10", and can shoot, can defend, has some limitations athletically, I think, which hurts him on ball, but he is a ridiculously good off-ball defender, so he kind of profiles into that 3-and-D mold. Now, why is he so polarizing? Because he's being mocked at the top and he doesn't have much on-ball skills. And we just saw – here's how I view it. We just saw Jabari Smith be mocked number 1 for 11 of the 12 months, it felt like. It was probably really 8 of the 12 months of the draft cycle until the last moment when Paolo eventually came out number 1 and Jabari went 3 with Chet in between them. And that was the right order. I think it's still a little bit early on Chet, Paolo, but I at this point would take Paolo. It's a little bit irrelevant to this. With Jabari Smith, he's going to be a very good player, but you can't take a guy who's going to be a player for his career as a number 1 pick. That's really where the issue lies is, can you take Ricochet to be this 3-and-D guy who, by the way, he sprints into his shots and can full stop, plant his feet and go, but the footwork is inconsistent. That's probably his biggest knock right now on offense in terms of shooting the ball. Can you take that number 1? And I don't think you can. He's not going to be an on-ball creator. The on-ball defense needs some work because his recovery ability is pretty poor, and that's an athletic limitation. But he plays hard, and he's going to help you. He's probably a starter. Like I think when you find someone 6'9", 6'10", especially 6'10", 3-and-D, it's a very rare mold, and you have to take that swing. So I like Ricochet. The big swing skill for him is, does he ever develop the ball skills? Could it be something that they're hiding in France? Possibly. I doubt it, though. And for me, I think I wouldn't take him until outside of the top 3 at the moment. I have him at number 6 on my board. So really Detroit is where I would first look. I think that's a fair opening starting point. But yeah, you can kind of just see why he's polarizing, right? Like he doesn't have much ball skills. Why is he being knocked number 1 if he's not a creator? He's not a true – he won't ever be a first or second option unless like the absolute best case scenario hits. And even then he's probably second option. So why are you taking that number 1? He's been mocked number 1 a while. I have gripes with that. I don't think he should be in consideration even for the top 2. Maybe the Wizards, because they do need a lot of defense, and you can fit him into next to a star like Cooper Flagg or Ace Bailey next year. It's just a little bit of a reach. Why not swing for a little bit more fence with a similar floor? So I guess that's kind of how I look at it. Now on the opposite end, Pacome Dadiet, he's also he's playing in Germany, but also French. He is a very high upside shooting player. I would say most of his upside comes from shooting, but it's really interesting. When I watched him at first, I kept seeing him drive to the basket, and every time he would go left. And I was expecting him. I was like, dang, this guy's way too left-hand dominant. He's really got to be able to go right. And then I watched him shoot, and he's a righty. That to me was really impressive, given that he's still 18 years old. He doesn't turn 19 until 1 month after the draft, so he's young. He has really good form, and teams just don't let him go right, and he still wins going left. I thought that was really impressive. He shot well at the rim. Now, that being said, some of the left-handed layups were out of control. His right-handed layups weren't out of control, but it was inconsistency more than a weakness, if that makes sense. That's something that more reps will fix. He can be prone to a lot of bad shot selection. He plays like he's young. The big thing with him is just the feel for the game. He's a project. And if you've done draft research over the last 10 years, international projects particularly, who are not drafted in the lottery, it's a very low success rate. So that's the risk with him. I actually think Dadiet would be one of the guys to break that rule. I have him in my first round grade. He has a really good motor. I think the touch is there at the rim. I think one day that's going to get there to be true up 3-level scoring. The shots there. That he's good at taking what the defense gives him. So I really like that. Now on defense, I think he makes some mistakes, a lot of mistakes actually. I think he's not aggressive enough. He doesn't read the next play. At least he's not willing to read the next play as much as he probably should. He needs to get stronger. and really he can be manipulated to be taken out of the play. And to me, that's a big negative. That's a flag for me personally. I don't like that kind of stuff. But if you're a team like, let's look at who has multiple picks in the second round. The Knicks should absolutely be taking him. He might even stay overseas, save you some money. The Wizards at 26. Toronto doesn't have multiple picks, but I wouldn't hate that. That would actually be a really good landing spot. Orlando at 18. These are teams where they're already, or at least with Orlando, they're already good. You get a shooter, you have that surefire skill. Can you teach him to play basketball and eventually defense in one of the best defensive environments in Orlando? I think probably. So I think that's actually a good landing spot. Maybe Milwaukee if you wanted an upside play. But yeah, really, I would say, and actually Utah at 29. That's a really good landing spot too. So any of these teams that are either good and can afford this extra patience that don't need him right now, but also have a usable skill for him if he comes over, but also teaching him defense, I think that's a really good spot for him. Like I said, New York, Orlando, Toronto even has a history of developing these kind of guys. I think those are good landing spots. So I also want to talk about Ariel Hukporti and AJ Johnson coming up. But first, let me tell you about FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL as both leagues are in the Stanley Cup final and NBA finals. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, last segment. Let's get into it. Ariel Hukporti. He is an interesting player, a very interesting player, I would add. So he actually tore his Achilles a year and a half ago. I think it was in 22 because he barely played. And then this year, he's back. So 7 foot, big body, just turned 22, auto eligible for the draft. He also added a little bit, I would say, he added some shooting ability, 62% from the line. It was something that was far away, probably still is far away, but there is maybe some upside there. But he actually moved really smoothly for somebody that wasn't, that had just torn his Achilles. I thought he was pretty good. Massive frame. He actually was at the combine in Chicago as well. Huge hands, massive frame, almost 7'3" wingspan. He's 6'11", so not really that 7 foot, but that's without shoes. Has a standing reach of 9'3". I really like his game and being able to be mobile. He could potentially be a rim protector. Has that upside if you can kind of get him into that. He's an upside big right now. Right now he's an energy big. I think the touch is getting a little bit better. He's not going to be much of a creator, but post-injury, look, when you're that big and your role is an energy big and you don't look any slower after an Achilles injury, which I think is the worst injury you can get in all of sports, that's really impressive. I think he'll get a second-round pick. Maybe he's stashed, but he's coming over from the NBL. I kind of expect him to come over for a team that needs a big. But the motor, the athleticism, the pick-and-roll ability, he also lost weight. I think that helped him a lot be smoother. I think he's somebody that you should look for in this end of the second round. If you're looking for a big, why not? You have two different options. One, you can put him on a two-way and he comes over. Maybe he outplays that and is an energy big right away. Or he's a draft and stash that, again, energy big. We see those kind of guys. There was James Nagy last year was kind of this. A little bit different because he was 18 or 19, something like that, and played in Spain. But I think there is value for these international kind of raw bigs that are energy bigs that could eventually grow into something else. Even if it's just a dynamic pick and roll ability and then he can make short reads, I think that's really impressive. And then let's end it on AJ Johnson. AJ Johnson had a decent combine, I would say. The first game was pretty good, made a lot of plays. His playmaking was consistent in both games. I've talked about him a good amount. He also, in the second game, only had 2 dunks. One was a leak out. One was a nasty poster on Nick Clifford. Really impressive. The background on him, he went to the Rising Stars program in the NBL. He was at Southern California Academy. He's a West Coast kid. He's pretty young, 19 and a half still. The problem is he's a tweener. He's 6'4" with a 6'8" wingspan, not a point guard, has playmaking ability, but he's not a point guard. The jump shot is far away. I think you have to really learn. He has to learn how to play defense and learn how to play just NBA basketball. And that's really my concern with him is can he put it together, because he's going to be 20 in the middle of his rookie season, which isn't that bad. But I think teams are going to be less patient with him than they would have been some other guys like him, right? So I think here's my sell with him. I wrote this down. The sell is he has a really good handle. I would say for a non-point guard, really good athleticism. The athleticism is the big sell. He's a raw project, and people like him because he can get downhill and dunk, right? He has slashing upside. There's something to be said about that archetype of the raw athlete, finding the right home. If he can make that raw athleticism be an actual ability and turn that into tangible skills and functional elements of it, I think it's actually a pretty good outcome. Now, the problem is I just don't think he actually has a decent chance to get there. The timeline to commit to him, this is what I wrote as on my big board, which will be released in a couple weeks with breakdowns. The timeline to commit to AJ Johnson, who's a tweener in the worst way, is a small wing and not a point guard, has questionable shooting upside. That's a fatal flaw. He's super skinny, measured at about 160 pounds at 6'4". You can't play on the wings with that. So you see this, he becomes more and more of a tweener. He's probably 2 to 3 years away from being ready to play, because he can play in the G League right now. I just don't think he's ready for that jump, but he needs to add at least 30 pounds to maximize his defense, because he plays hard and he has some upside there. I would say, given the 6'4", 6'8" wingspan, like you can do something with that. But the problem is, can he get all of those to come together? The playmaking to turn into either a point guard, or like he has two outcomes with that. You either become a true point guard and be a really good playmaker. You become a great shooter and you embrace the wing role, and you have to add a massive amount of weight while also improving your shot. But the shot doesn't have good indicators right now. So I think that's the risk for me, is that combination is too risky. I wouldn't give him a first round pick, maybe early second, because the guarantees in it. That's my risk with it. So I'm a little bit more out on AJ Johnson than a lot of people. I'm just lower than him on most, but I get the appeal at the same time. So he's an interesting prospect. In this episode, we talked about Nikola Topic. He's a lottery pick. Pacome Dadiet, he's a first-round pick, I think. Zachary Risache, also a lottery pick. Probably at this point higher than Nikola Topic, probably top 6 to 7. And then there's Nikola Topic. And then I went into some second-round steals that could potentially be had. AJ Johnson, who's a high-risk, high-reward player. And then Ariel Hukporti, who just overcame injury into being a energy big that can come over to the States right away. Really appreciate everybody again who continues to listen to Locked On NBA Big Board. My name is Richard Stayman, aka Mavs Draft. Really appreciate everybody who's listening, and we will see you guys next time.